What I'm doing work before.
Okay. I'm sorry to interrupt everyone's conversations.
No, you're not.
Attention! Blue! Okay, sorry to interrupt conversations, but it's 6:30, so we should start. I'd like to welcome you guys to the April meeting for the community, game dev community. I'd just like to start off by saying what the agenda is tonight. Unfortunately, one of the talks was cancelled. If you've been following the mailing list and you're looking forward to the one talk. So tonight we'll have quick news section. We'll have talk sessions where we have a report back from Julian and John from GDC, which will be pretty cool. Then we'll have Alec up here on procedural generation in games, levels and weapons. That'll be done by Alec. And I think I'd like to elect Alec to control the tower defense challenge.
So what's his idea?
Whatever you want to call it, report back, seeing as it was his idea and it's a pretty cool idea. And there's a demo of the game that I'm working on, False Eden, and I think John said he has a game he wants to show off that. And then after that there'll be open floor. If you have something to show, you can bring it up and show it. So to start off with, important news. Ludum Dare is April 20th to 23rd. It's approximately 10 days and 8 hours from now, so you should start preparing. It's their 10-year anniversary jam, and they're trying to get 1,000 people to take part. So if you have that weekend free, I would suggest you take part. It's a really good experience. And then this weekend is the Vits Game Jam Tarts. It's being run by Alec, I think.
Yeah.
If you want, you can explain it more to people.
Yeah, we'll go and talk about
Okay,
this.
cool. So I'll leave it to him. And then in other news, Game Maker Studio, which is the latest version of Game Maker, is in beta at the moment. It's quite a big leap because it's going to support Windows and Mac, Android, iOS, HTML5, and Symbian, where you can buy each of the modules separately. You need to always start with the base, obviously, which is Windows and Mac, but it'll be $200 each extra after that. So it's a bit steep if you're trying to buy it all at once, but it's definitely worth taking a look at. Also, Unity passed 1 million developers using their tools sometime in the last month or so that's pretty cool. And Indie Game the Movie is premiering next month in the UK. So let's have Julian and John come up for
Can I ask that we go a second? Because
Go a second.
I don't know how long this thing is going to be, and I'd rather be able to flexibly cut it short.
Cool, no problem. Alec, would you like to come up and give your talk now? That would be awesome. John and them asked if they could go a second.
Okay.
Sorry.
Cool. Let me just get this up and running.
Cool. Does anyone else Does anyone else have anything they want to share news-wise?
We have new people.
Sorry?
We have new people.
New people. Hello, new people. Okay, cool. I'll hand it over.
Yeah, my laptop has power limits. I know that.
It's actually doing
I wonder which killer vector.
Added.
I did it.
Ask for words and slow. Say PDF, so never take a while.
Cool. Everyone, can I have your attention, please?
and then it turns out to be a
My name is Alec. I'll be talking about procedural generation in games. Basically, an algorithm to generate levels, and then just some design considerations to procedurally generate weapons. So, an overview of this presentation. In the levels, I came up with something called an erosion algorithm, and I'll give an overview of that. Then I'll talk about the various steps. So preparation, initial water droplets, the random walk streams, and finalization. Then I will talk about weapons and like design considerations, so characteristics, the different things you can modify when it comes to projectiles, and then also art considerations to increase your variability. Sorry about that, I'm going to take my phone off the side.
Thank you for being here.
So rude, it's a presentation.
Okay. So basically, the erosion algorithm is based on the natural process of erosion. It's a 4-step process which consists of preparation, the initial droplet, runoffs, and finalization. Okay, so with preparation, basically the way it creates levels is it's tile-based. So if you think about something like real-time strategy or free shooter like Michael discussed at the last presentation, this could be applied to it. So if our level is n tiles by p tiles, so n tiles, n rows by p columns, then this is the way the algorithm works. So what happens is we strip off the exterior tiles, so we remove the very outer, so along the, it's a rectangular shape, so we move that outer rows and columns. So what happens is there's a 2D ray which is n minus 2 by p minus 2. The reason for this is if you have that, when you in your finalization step, you can add that back in, and you can prevent the player from ever leaving the level. So what the next step is to decide on a convention. So for example, 1 means you can't move in that area, so it's a building or a tile, a block that prevents you from moving, or and 0 means you can. So for a 5 by 5 tile level, you end up with this 3 by 3 because you've removed the exterior. Cool. Then the initial droplet, basically it makes an area where the player can move initially. So it's just a square area, and you can decide on the size. It depends on the size of your level, and it also depends on how cavernous you want your level to be. And basically just gave the example of the screen where you can see the 1s being where you can't move and the 0s being the initial water droplet. Then what happens is we have random walk streams. So you select the number of random walks, so that's the number of runoffs that you're going to have from your initial droplet. And then for each random walk, choose a starting position on the radius of the droplet, so on the outer side of the droplet, so the top, the bottom, the left, and the right. And then use a loop to do a random walk by randomly choosing a direction for each iteration. So go up, left, 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 up, that kind of thing. And what it does is it then eats away by converting the letters in that direction to a 0. So then that person can move there, right? What's very important is that there's only 4 directions. Now, can anyone possibly give me a reason why I choose 4 instead of 8?
You're going to get diagonal buildings. It's contrast.
Cool, thanks. And then another consideration is to limit the directions based on the starting location. So if you're starting at the top, you don't want to go back down on yourself, because what could happen is you start at the top, go up, go left, go down, try go right, or something like that, or up, and go into yourself, so you lock yourself in, and that's not going to be very productive. So a quick example is we choose a start location to be the top, randomly on the top, and then we limit the walk directions to left, right, up, so you can't walk back down on yourself. And then iteration 1, move up, iteration 2, move left, iteration 3, left, iteration 4, left, and you'll notice the colors, and this is what the iteration does. So the up is the red, and then moving left along the different colors. So that's just one random walk. After multiple iterations, you can see areas have been eaten away randomly from random sides. And yeah, basically, that's how it works. Finalization is basically the extra stuff on top of this. So choose your start locations and spawn points where the player can walk. So choose an area, you can do that. Decide on how you want to do that. For one game, you might want to make it the far left so that he is forced to travel to the far right. Or you might not really care and just choose a random location that's empty. So that's up to you to kind of decide. And then also add that exterior ring to prevent the player from leaving the level. Then optional extras is randomly choose tiles from their sets. So basically getting the appearance of the level to be randomized as well. So you have a whole set of tiles where you can move and a whole set of tiles where you can't move. And you choose from those sets randomly according to what the tile type is, whether it's 1 or whether it's a 0. Also then, another optional extra is adding random decals. So for example, if you're making a procedurally generated city with streets and buildings and stuff like that, you might want to add in boxes or rubbish that you can kick around to make the city look like derelict. So just showing what would happen when you add in the exterior. And then the result, what I did is I used this algorithm to generate a procedurally generated city. You can see that by that little section outlined in white. And basically you can see how the algorithm has eaten away along random walk, eaten away the initial droplet over here. And you can see how the random walks have eaten away various areas of the city to make it look really cool. And yeah, so that's basically how the algorithm, that's just the algorithm in practice. Then for weapons, basically, this is basically just design consideration. So think about some weapon characteristics that could be randomly assigned. So for example, rate of fire, you might want to make it between a bullet every 2 minutes shot and 1,200 bullets per minute. You want to choose different projectiles, so bullets, lasers, missiles, you name it. You might want to change the number of projectiles so you can get like a shotgun sort of effect. For example, 1 to 5, and then the spread of the projectiles, so 30 degrees apart or however you want to do that. Further considerations is like recoil. So if you've got a gun that rapidly repeats, you could have it vary the recoil. Decide, this is what I want my recoil to be between a certain range, and then also magazine size, which you can see the example there. I think what's important to note is when designing this, it's possible to make some of your characteristics dependent on each other. So you might not want to be able to fire 1,200 missiles per minute. That might not make sense for the game. So also like magazine size, if you're doing magazines, you don't necessarily want 30 missiles in a magazine because that would be a fairly big magazine for someone to carry. And then talking about projectiles, so think about like things like movement speed, how fast does the projectile move, what is its damage, and then lifetime. So lifetime and movement speed would affect the range. So how long does the projectile stay alive for? And then also think about like random buffs that you can assign to the projectile. So you can have buffs like slow or maim or confuse or some, like, think of buffs. And you could randomly add those to projectiles. So you might have a missile that freezes the enemy in position, or have a machine gun that maims your enemies so that they lose health continuously over time. It's just think about that kind of. And then art. So the actual gun, you can choose, like you can make maybe a whole range of different components and fit them together so that you can get a whole range of different looking weapons. So maybe you have a magazine that looks like a whole bunch of magazines, you have a whole bunch of barrels, a whole bunch of stocks, a whole bunch of triggers, and then you can add them together, randomly assign them to make these different looking weapons, or you can make the components of the gun dependent on its characteristics. So maybe rate of fire affects what the magazine looks like, the size of the magazine will affect its size. The type of projectile might affect what the barrel is. You can go on and on, but I won't. And then with projectiles, randomly choose your colors. So choose colors and materials and particle effects, because then you can get quite a range of projectiles. So you have your set missile sort of thing, and it might have 5 different smoke effects, 5 different colors, and 5 different materials that you can choose from. And already that's quite a range for just one projectile. Effectively 125 different kinds of projectiles you can get from that. And then you've still got buffs and stuff like that. Another smart thing you can do is choose these based on the different buffs. So maybe you make the rocket missile blue because it slows, so it's ice, that kind of thing. It's just basic design considerations that you can use in your game to make pretty cool. So in conclusion, I gave a basic overview of a random level generation algorithm. Cannot be used for platformers because there's no guarantee that the platforms are going to be in range of each other. So it's more used for, you could use it for first-person shooters, top-down shooters, real-time strategy, turn-based strategy, basically anything, just not platforms, things that rely on gravity. Well, yeah, okay. Then I've also discussed some design considerations for procedural weapon creation. I'll make this document online, as I usually do, available online as I usually do. So before I go into my conclusion, I thought I'd mention the monthly challenges, which I'm pretty keen to start. Are people in general keen to participate in monthly challenges? So here at this meeting, we'll announce the theme for the next week, sort of the next session, and then everyone just create a game and then show it during the open forum. Anyone keen?
So what do the artists do?
Make cool art.
Yeah.
You can, but you're not just a pure artist.
Yeah, but there are people here who are pure artists.
Then put up your hand and speak to the
It's fine, because if they like the
It doesn't-
game and they want to make art with someone who likes to do the program, and then it's ace.
And also, it doesn't necessarily have to be individual efforts. There's never been that constraint. It can be anyone, just as long as everyone in the team gets credit for it. It's not like 15 people work on a game to make this amazing game.
And one person
stands up and says, I made it, it's me. So I think,
I think, like, if we add to that maybe we just focus it on a specific technology, like you just did your random terrain generation. Maybe you can just set a challenge for a specific kind of technology, and maybe see what ideas pop out of that. Every comment, just an idea.
okay.
Well,
Do you have something?
Yeah, I was thinking, like, along with the TD challenge that you did for this meet,
Yeah.
if the artists just did like art that they thought would make a cool looking TD, then people can take that art and put it in their TD or make something around that as well. Yeah, so like they make open source, in quotes, art for the other programmers to use. Because like I made a really horrible looking TD. So To
Hey,
be
you're
honest,
shooting
if somebody had been like, here's a cool looking tower design, I could have used that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
that could help.
I made a horrible looking half TV, so.
More than I guess.
Yeah, so people are fairly keen for this, I think. Demonstrate during open floor, is that cool?
It's cool.
And then submission is just basically coming here and demonstrating, and if the Cape Town guys want to take part, they can just email me their downloads. And then I was thinking that we could vote maybe on the next challenge, but it might be a bit of a mission to count hands now. But the ideas that I came up with are bullet hell, music-based game, swarms of minions, split-screen multiplayer, first-person shmup, thank you, Michael. Basically a side-scrolling shooter except from first-person perspective. Then ultra-unique genre hybrid. And then Free Lives asked me if I could add Rambo and dubstep to the ideas for me. So extra ideas.
What exactly did that last week? Because Rambo, you could make like a Contra game.
I think that's the point, that it's very open-ended.
Okay. But dubstep, I'm really bad.
There has to be a drop.
It's a team-based game. But if you stay too close to your teammates, you get debuffs.
What do you guys reckon? Should I just email the
So you
group
have to
and then
run
people
it.
can vote on it, or should I just choose one?
I like 1 and 3.
If you're making it available to Cape Town guys as well, then why don't we just vote on the mailing list? Then
That's usually
we can make it easier.
avoid the mailing list. Alternatively, set a deadline for the mailing list, otherwise you're just going to have like
Yeah, deadline's a good idea.
voting thing. And
What about those
roll a dice.
Oh, yeah.
Roll a dice, and
You
we're
want
going
to
to
do
get
the
kind of
edge?
dice for this meeting. You've got 8 candidates, roll the dice, and then say, well, it's number whatever.
Okay.
That's probably the easiest, and then there's no waiting for other people to vote.
Sounds
You get a
good.
chance to vote, or
Shall I-
I lost the chance to vote, or my email that lost.
Cool, shall I just... I'll run a random MATLAB thing just quickly. Randomize the numbers. No.
I have a random number generated in my brain that says number 5.
Cool. You
So-
make it bigger though on the emailing list, ask for themes. Get people to submit lots of themes, then you just, have a list of themes, roll the dice, and then, that's the next theme.
You could
Use the
also,
emailing list to submit themes.
Yeah, like the theme can be technology based, so then there would be both ideas at the same time.
Okay, so maybe also then have a whole bunch, yeah, so maybe 2 themes, one's technology based and one's that, or have technology based themes in the list of themes.
okay. You can always plagiarize Ludum Dare's theme list. There's a few thousand on there.
Maybe.
Would work for the randoms.
I think people submitting their own ideas is good because that forces at least one person to take part. If they want to do that.
Cool, so enough on that unless everyone has anything else to add.
I have a question about the random walk stuff.
Yeah.
Do you think it would make sense to take your random walk for the erosion algorithm and invert it for building a city? So place several initial droplets, and then what the area in between them, whatever's left in that area, becomes the city.
I suppose. Yeah, you could. What you could do also is invert it so that you could invert it and as part of the preparation strip out the one side so that it's always guaranteed to get. So invert it totally and then add an extra step at the end rather, and add the outer so you can't get out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Also related to that, you said it's a cell-based algorithm. So does that mean it focuses on reduced cells in an entire map, or just one big cell? Because if it's a reduced cell in an entire map, how do you make the edges conform to each other? Any ideas?
No idea what you asked.
So you've got a big map and you divide it, so you've got a 9 by 9 and you divide it into squares of 3.
Yeah.
So 3 by 3s. Now, how do you make the edges of those 3 by 3s conform to each other if you put a whole lot of random droplets?
I'd take it down to the smallest resolution that you can. So, for example, in that FPS, what I did is I said buildings are this size, therefore place buildings like this, and if you want small sections of smaller buildings to represent that, make one thing that size.
Okay.
I want to ask you the flexibility of that, because I remember you showed me a little while earlier, and I saw you tended to get a shape where you have a reasonably large open area followed by sort of like smaller tunnels going out. Can the algorithm be modified so that you have something that's sort of just open area, or like somewhere where you have more sort of snaking tunnels?
You could make the initial droplet smaller, and you could also increase the number of random walks so that they're a lot more than the number of sides, so it would eventually tend to.
You can also make the random walk jump bigger as well. So instead of having one tile, you can set it to be like 3 tiles that moves over 3. And when it does a left move, it moves 3 tiles and makes a big 3, so you can make bigger tunnels if you want as well.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So
Sorry, bro.
So what you can do is start with the jumping big and then jumping smaller as you go on.
Okay.
So then you won't get that thing in the middle.
Okay, yeah. No. There's also a lot of algorithms I looked online that had the problem of making just little big areas with like just little tunnel station.
You can limit that initial droplet so it's like 3 by 3 in a 60 by 60 thing, and then just increase the number of random walks to like 30, 40.
And I suppose you can like, for each of those separate runoffs, you can like tell them to keep like a minimum distance from each other and so forth.
Could do that.
I just wanted then to ask on the weapon side as well, because the only other time I've actually seen it, and only recently learned about, was I'm pretty sure, I think it's safe to assume that you know that Borderlands did the procedural weapon thing there. The procedures, the techniques that you're talking about, is that something are you aware of what kind of technique they utilized?
I have no idea, but I assume that they'd use something similar to that, like changing the different kinds of projectiles so you can get machine gun rockets launched.
Their randomness is based, they've got the idea of companies. So you've got the different companies that they sets of, so you know if you've got one company, the firepower would always be a little bit higher. But your randomness is never, is what you're saying, and that's exactly true, is your randomness is never truly random. You're going to find some things I'm saying like, well, if it's rockets, you're never going to have a massive magazine size. The speed is always going to be a certain range. So what I think what's important is that what you're saying is, you must think about that beforehand before you start doing random stuff. Say these are the types of weapons or whatever it is. This way a rocket has these variables, a machine gun has these variables, and they can be different from each other. I wouldn't necessarily take kind of just pick a weapon. You can pick a rate,
Because I suppose that's like the big challenge if you're doing procedural stuff like this, is how to keep your game balanced and putting those kinds of constraints.
Yeah.
So that's again, something that happens in Borderlands, that your weapon randomness is also affected by the level. So your player's level, you will find weapons within that, and that also there's a multiplier or a factor on the weapon. So again, it's about designing up front and saying, manufacturing to use all the different dimensions, that I'm going to have, and they said, you listen to some common ones. You might want to listen to other ones that's going to work with your game. So player level might be a random dimension, dimension that you can work on.
Well, you could get some random, fairly creative person to come up with like a large sort of decision tree with like, if it's going to be a rocket, and then you've got like 3 or 4 things that could be with that thing, and then you could just randomly walk through that and combine all of those traits, and then you just make sure that at each step, the next step would make sense, like that. And then when you make a level, at the same time you sit and you think of what weapons would be appropriate, and you build that up.
It's actually the thing about procedural generation. It's not truly random. It's actually a state machine, and in that state machine, which is predictable, then you have those random steps that you said. This is decision tree. Even the walk is not truly. It's not just dots. You start at a point, and then I'm randomly moving, but I've always at the center point, and I can actually only move in 3 directions. So each step is random, but it actually is a predefined kind of
like Berlin noise as opposed to noise.
Sorry?
Kind of the way like Berlin noise is always related to the pixels next to it, not just random.
Exactly.
It's basically a structured tree, but where the path
when each node you can make a random decision.
branch you move on is randomized.
And if you really feel like being fancy, you could train a neural network to create your decision tree. Yeah. Cool. So I'm done.
Except that most people would
About the I assume everyone saw the poster for the game jam part on both the agenda and my presentation. So basically what's happening is next week, Saturday, from 3 until 8, 3 p.m. till 8 p.m. At Bits in the game lab, the Digital Games Lab. We're going to basically start the game jam, and basically it's going to have a process of we're going to sit down, and I've drawn up lots of themes, and I've asked people to contribute to the themes semi-successfully. Basically there's graphical themes and there's word themes. We're going to vote which batch we're going to select from, and then we're going to do it by raffle, so someone's going to stand up and pull a number out the hat that's going to correspond to the theme. So there and then we'll have a theme, then we'll sit and we'll discuss ideas, do the whole typical global game jam thing with discussing of ideas, forming teams, and then sitting down and mapping to it. And then on Sunday we're going to meet from 9 until 3. So it's quite a short time frame that we've got. So it'll be fun to see what gets done. And if you want to participate, please let me know. It would be nice. So my email address is, well, when I send out my presentation, you'll have my email address, assuming you're part of the SA Game Dev mailing list. And also, it's up on sagamedev.com or .com. Cool.
Oh, and I grabbed admin rights from Sven on the GDA JHP Facebook page. So if you like that, I'll try and send stuff along there as well.
Okay, awesome.
Cool.
So, next, please, do you need my computer?
Yes, Julian. No.
So hey, the idea was that this would be super informal. Am I in that screen?
Yeah.
Do I need to be there?
You're good. You're in the middle.
So the idea was that I would talk to you about getting to GDC and hey, hi. Getting to GDC, how you'd be able to get there if you plan to do it, or how much it would cost you, and talk a little bit about the presentations I went to and some of the people I met. But I'm going to try and keep it really quick, and then if you want to know more, you can ask me afterwards, I guess. Yeah, so to start with, it costs a lot of money. The flight was 13,000 Rand return. And then the ticket to get into GDC can range from $50 for I think an expo pass, which probably isn't worth it, because going into the expo, it's more, they're trying to sell you software, they're trying to sell you tools to help make your game, but we already use tools that pretty much do it anyway. And it doesn't really help unless they're, from what I saw, there were a lot of places selling online tools, more for social networking and that kind of thing, that they'd be encouraging you to build into your games. But for the most part, it's definitely not a consumer thing, and so there aren't competitions really. There aren't cool things to do at the expo, except for one booth where they were having all of the finalists for the Indie Game Awards. You could play all of their games there, so that was awesome to see. But aside from that, I wouldn't recommend that pass. And then there are passes for everything up until the one that I got cost 12,000 Rand. And that gets you into everything, and it's a ridiculous amount of money to spend, so you don't actually have to spend that. For staying there and for food, I only spent $6 grand on all of that, and that was for a week of staying there. And what helped a lot was that I was staying at a hostel. So a hostel is $29 an evening, $29 a night, and it included breakfast, whereas a hotel would be $100 a night. So yeah, you can save a lot of money if you want it. And so basically the whole trip cost me just over 30 grand, and that was also because of the American visa.
Where did you find the hotel and hostel information?
So the hostel one was actually more from asking around. Sven helped a lot because he's like in the whole indie crowd. And then basically the hostel that we stayed at was very much like an indie developer hostel where like everyone there were people who were like carrying their laptops around and like programming just on the fly and showing one another their games there. So it was actually an awesome place to be. But otherwise on the GDC website they offer like accommodation that's close by, and they say that there are like GDC special deals and stuff. But I think the cheapest one that I saw was still over $100. So I mean, granted, going to a hostel, you check in and they're like, here's a pillowcase and a sheet, go make your bed. But I mean, I saved so much money, it was totally worth it for me. Yeah, and then actually going to all the stuff. So for the 5 days that I spent there, the first day, like it was a full day workshop on game writing. So yeah, like the guy who did it was, he's like a lead writer at LucasArts. And we spent most of the day talking about narratology, which is stuff that we actually, like I covered in school already. So it was like making a conflict the focus of your story, looking at the hero's journey and the archetypes in there, and then finally like show, don't tell. So the idea is that you, when you're writing your game, you should never have to give words or give text or anything. The whole context of your game, preferably, can be told just through your gameplay and through the actions. If you absolutely have to be using words, then you try and make it as expressive as possible. So you're not saying something silly like, "Oh, I'm really unhappy that you're late," but it's like, "Where the hell have you been?" Or "I was so worried." Like adding more to your words than just saying what they are, because you wanna add as many layers to it as you can, so that it's not just words, but it says more about the character. Yeah, those were the main takeaways on Monday. The Tuesday I went to like mainly art and tech art workshops, because that's my interest. In the tech art one, it was mostly to do with like they had things on tools that people would use. So an example was using PowerShell in Windows 7. But for the most part, it didn't make sense to me because the guy who was saying, sorry if he ends up watching this, but but it's like he was talking about the stuff that makes PowerShell awesome is that like it's built into Windows 7 and it allows you to make use of like C#.NET libraries. But it's like if the power comes from .NET, then why not just use C# anyway? And it's like it's a language that people know, and it didn't make sense to me. And then there are other guys who are talking more about like changing a culture within your company to encourage more growth in tech art. Things like gathering as much data as you can. So using analytics and using as much like time everything, and then basically write your tool and write your whatever workflow increase that you have, and then definitely go back and look at the time difference. Like, did this actually help my artists to speed up whatever they were doing before? And then add up all of these times and then show that to management. Because tech art as a job, you're usually not working on content itself. So you're actually just there to help other people work faster. And from a management perspective, like that's really hard to not understand, but it's hard to see the value in that unless you actually see numbers. And then it was also in terms of managing a tech art team, like, I mean, in South Africa, I guess we have like tech art teams of 1 or 2, but overseas, like they were talking about tech art teams of like over 20 or so. And then at that point, like even before then really, but code review becomes really important. And so they were talking about how we should take a lot of things that people have learned over the years in software engineering, and to incorporate those into the tech art tools to make sure that we're a lot stricter about the code we write, because we could break the game too. Yeah, and then Wednesday to Friday, like there were just random talks that I went to, also mostly art. So I went to like all the round tables that I could, mainly because I knew that they're not recorded. So the pass that I got, the all access one, allows me to go online, get access to GDC Vault, where you can get like quite a few free talks as well, and they're really awesome. You should see them. But because I knew that the round tables weren't being recorded, I specifically went to those as opposed to any of the other talks because I could see them online. And but there were 2 specifically that I just had to go and see, and there were 2 Blizzard ones on the working behind like Diablo 3, The one is like the Art of Diablo 3, which is actually free, and like it is amazing. It is like they take all of these art principles that you know as an artist, and you see them actually applying it in their game. So like I think a lot of the time there's this sort of separation between like knowing how to do something as an artist and actually applying it in a game. It's like I think it's the same in programming too. It's easy to know the theory, but when you get to a problem, and even though you have the tools there, you don't actually think of using them if you haven't used them before. So examples, like the guy spoke about looking at your game screen as a canvas. So in Diablo, they'd like separate their game screen into like layers. So you'd have your background layer, which would be low contrast because this stuff isn't important. You'd have your character layer, which is like very high contrast and detailed because this is where you really want people to look. And then on that layer as well, there'd be effects happening. And then the effects would be like super saturated and bright because flashy effects make your game seem cool. And then over that, there'd be the UI. And then they'd look at these layers and then treat each layer specific to its like what it needs to do in gameplay. So the first thing they said would be like gameplay first. Every single art decision you make has to support the game design. So as an example, there'd be this bridge where there's an artist who worked really hard at this bridge and made it super detailed and it looked beautiful. But then you're a barbarian and you're running over the bridge and you have all of these minions and whatever like running around and you're fighting zombies and whatever, and they're all running over this bridge and you start losing track of where everything is because this bridge is so detailed and so beautiful that it's actually getting in the way of the game.
There's too much stuff on the bridge.
Right.
So
it was too noisy.
Too cluttered.
So they had to go and take this bridge that was beautiful on its own but didn't work in the game, and then have to throw dirt on it and mess it up and basically like blur the hell out of the surface so that the bridge wasn't something to look at anymore, but made the game work so much better. And then have other little things like with hitting guys. So you have when you're dealing damage to an area, like it's hard to tell whether you've dealt damage to something or not. Because you deal this like damage effect or something, and it's an area of effect spell, but you're not quite sure. Like guys on the border, you don't know if they're taking damage or not. So they looked at like fighting games, and they went through fighting games frame by frame, and they realized that when you're fighting and you hit someone, there's like for one frame, the guy that's taking damage flashes white or some super bright color. So they put that in the game as well. I'm dealing damage, and you can see visually when someone's taking damage or not.
So little time that it's not really noticeable visual impacts. You
But
just
like you
see
do
it.
recognize it.
You recognize it, but
Yeah.
you don't see it as
If you're not looking for it, you don't see it.
So they talk about how to deal with the artist's feelings, and you have to kind of say, listen, I know you've got this really cool like,
Not really.
because I think that's a huge challenge of dealing with managing artists.
What they did do really well was you look at all of their designs and you see that when they were iterating, like that was a specific case where something didn't work already in the game. But for the vast majority of stuff, like from environment all through to characters, through everything else, like he showed a lot of iteration. You can like you should see the presentation, but like he shows iteration on like boss monsters and everything, and it's like the first version is really cool, and they're like, well, this is great, but what if we try this or whatever? And so they have all of these iterations, and you see like 10 versions of the same monster, and each gets better and better, or maybe worse, and then they just don't go along that route and try something else. Until finally they're like, yeah, this is it, we found it. And you don't actually see anything in 3D until they're happy with the design, like as a painting.
So they're really going to go into the kind of what's developed like issues of design. And,
yeah, well, it's a lot like
married to any.
Yeah, it's a lot like prototyping a game where you want to keep it loose and you want to keep it very like to a specific idea or something. And then when you've explored that and you're happy with the exploration, then you can say, right, let's make the final end game. What I also found really cool about that was because it's like Diablo and it's a 2D game, effectively, they were using a lot of 2D cheats. So like a tree, for example, instead of making a super detailed tree, they were using like planes of branches. But because the way they were painted, sorry?
It was that they actually used 2.5D where they made the 3D model and then they put the half of it they made.
I was there.
But I also saw the video.
Yeah. So it was 2.5D, but like so like the trunk would be 3D, but the branches themselves are actually like flat planes. And this is stuff that we actually do in mobile development. So it felt really awesome to see that like skills that we learn when we're making our little iPhone games or whatever carry across to super big AAA game development. And then, so this was the art talk, which you can see. But the other thing that, like, the other Blizzard talk, which like blew my mind, was one on tech art. So usually when people describe tech art, they say it's someone who's somewhere on the line between an artist and a programmer. So if it's a more artsy tech artist, then it's usually more rigging or something. And if it's a more tech artist, then it's more tools. And you're somewhere in between. And so the guy who's like he's a lead tech artist there. He said that whole idea is totally screwed up because it totally misses out on design. And so he was encouraging all of his tech artists to pick up more design skills, and when they were interviewing new tech artists, they were looking at ones who were interested in picking up design. And the idea was that they'd end up with sort of a rapid prototyping team. So instead of having to think of an idea, and then for the implementation, go to talk to artists and see if they can make it work, and then go and talk to programmers and see if it's viable that way, and then make sure that the game designers also sign off on it. You could like cut out a lot of that back and forth because you have someone who understands the art and the programming and hopefully learns to understand the design too. Which I thought was amazing because for the most part, when you think about going to like a AAA studio, you think about specialization. You will be a pure character modeler. You'll be a pure like physics programmer or something. And it's like the idea that there's a little niche within a AAA game company where you can be like pure generalist. Like all of the skills that you'd effectively be learning in a South African context could apply to that really. The idea of that was really awesome. And I hope it's not just Blizzard that adopts this attitude. Because yeah, so he tried to talk about like how encouraging this kind of attitude within their team allowed them to save like time and money, and allowed them not just that, but to implement things that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. So an example is there's a witch doctor ability where you like summon this wall of zombies. So like these zombies pop out of the ground, jump on one another, form a wall, and then collapse onto your enemies.
That's the one particular upgrade to the skill.
Right, so like that sounds like a crazy idea, right? You talk to the game designers and they're like, it sounds awesome, but this is an ability that has to happen in like a second. If it takes longer than that, we can't use it because games need to be snappy, they need to be responsive, right? So then you talk to the artists and they're like, damn, like an animation with zombies crawling on one another, and then it's gonna take like, we need at least 3.5 seconds or so. Yeah, and then the programmer's like, well, we can implement it, but you know, we need okay from the other two. So then the tech artists were like, well, at this rate, it looks as if this thing's gonna be scrapped. There's no way that the teams on their own are going to okay this. So they're like, well, we'll just take like a day or so. And then they basically animated zombies like jumping on one another without actually animating their bodies. So it's just like moving their models. And then like just so that you could get a feel of what the ability would feel like without actually committing to any of the artwork or anything. And that was good enough that the artists were like, well, you know, maybe we could work around that and use that timing. And it timed in at like 1.2 seconds, so the game designers were like, yeah, that's okay. And if it weren't for that, the ability would never have made it to the game. So having this sort of being able to understand art and programming and design, while not necessarily useful in other parts of a super big specialized studio, it was amazing to see that, you know, there was a space for us rare individuals.
Depending on particular, ideas though, you may need to go from the tech art to the individual things,
definitely.
But it means you don't have to.
Yeah, and
necessarily for all the ideas.
It meant that so the idea was that this guy wanted to foster a culture where if a game designer had an awesome idea and didn't know if it was possible to make, the first thing he should think of is to go to their tech art team and say, is this possible? Because hopefully you have like all of the information that is required without the specialization, but like all of the basic information all there. So it's like, I have this awesome idea, is this possible? Yes. Then it's like one stop instead of going to like 3 departments.
But if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. You haven't really lost.
You've lost the day. So what?
No, you haven't taken up the specialist time working on.
And they can be hammering away at like the stuff that really needs specialization. So the guy was saying that where before their producer would show people around the studio and say like, these are the tech artists. Oh, what do tech artists do? Well, they sometimes rig and sometimes. He eventually like stopped doing that because that wasn't. I mean, they did all of those things too, but they were doing so much more, and eventually they were just like, these guys just, they know everything. So we called them the Imaginaries or something like that. It was
It's almost like decision makers in a way.
not necessarily decision makers, but guys who can make things happen,
Well,
really quickly.
Not so much decision makers, it's like decision confirmers.
Yeah.
So
I mean, spiritual concept, you confirming or
Yeah.
denying that this idea. I remember working when I was in my opinion, we have decisions, you have sometimes conflict of interest. You say, well, we've got two ideas, they're both good, but we don't know which one to do.
So let's see them both.
You know, let's see them both, and then we can make some decisions based on the data, as you said. It's 1.26. Okay, well, that actually changes now the story because no one thought it was going to be in that time frame, or it is going to be in that time frame.
Yeah. So those are like the big presentations I went to, and then I also met like a bunch of people. So I think like the most important thing if you end up planning to go to GDC is that you have to have like, I feel that you should have really solid goals in mind about what you want to do while you're there. Because there's so much that goes on that if you're not sure, it's easy to get washed away and start doing stuff that doesn't form part of your plan. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Like you may end up doing cool things that you didn't expect to do anyway. But when I went, I knew like two main things. The one is I wasn't looking for a job yet. So I didn't take a portfolio and I didn't take business cards, which was actually a really bad idea because everyone there is trading business cards. So even if you're not looking for a job or you're just trying to suss out what things are like, you should take business cards anyway because you never know. And then the other was to know who you want to meet beforehand. So like I already knew that I wanted to meet like the lead character artist at Naughty Dog. I wanted to meet tech artists at Valve and Volition. And so I already had their details and I'd already contacted them beforehand. And when I went, I got to meet all of these people. I got to have dinner paid for by Valve. I got to it's like I got to meet all of these people, and if I hadn't prepared for it beforehand, I would have been totally lost as to like, well, where do I go now? Who do I meet now? So I think that's really important to do. I ended up getting like the Naughty Dog lead character artist like playing Blade Slinger. I don't know, that was great. I wish I took a photo. And that's it. If you have questions, maybe after Julian's talk because it's been a while. Awesome.
Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Alec, Jonathan, I brought evidence I went to GDC. Okay, firstly I have to introduce myself. Well, I'm Julian, I'm an indie game developer, I'm the deputy editor at dev.mag, and I also do contract work to go make video games, which I'm currently doing at the moment. I have to tell you about this little badge over here, because it has a story behind it. Does anyone here who know who Ian Bogost is? Yes. Okay, for everyone else, Ian Bogost is a game designer and lecturer at Georgia Tech. He made a Facebook game called Cow Clicker, which became rather popular. And he has this whole thing about satire in video games. So because of all the things of video games getting cloned, he made this little thing, don't clone my indie game bro. If there's one thing you can take away from this, don't clone my indie game bro. But more along the lines of going to GDC. Firstly, 20-hour plane trips really suck.
Yes.
Yeah, it takes 20 hours to fly from South Africa to San Francisco. Like Jonathan, I've got an all-access pass, so I went around to lots of things, and I can go watch even more things online. I started out on Monday going to the same talk as Jonathan, and we actually decided we don't want to see each other today. We see each other enough, like everything else. So, we just went, okay, he's sitting over there. I'm definitely sitting on that side of the room there. And it was actually really beneficial because it meant that, we went around, we interacted with lots of new people, and, I met the writer for Assassin's Creed, and a writer who was, specializing in children's stories, and some students and some other people from Singapore. So I, met a lot of interesting people just by sitting down at a table for a talk. And Jonathan already described how we did it. Now Tuesday I had fun because I went to the Indie Game Summit. And this is basically a series of talk by indie developers. So I got to hear a talk on, is it better to use your own engine or is it better to use an engine that's already built? And it was just this series of talks, and it's really hard to describe because it's kind of a blur of awesome. But that's the thing about GDC, it's really, really awesome. It's like, if you can afford it, I would highly recommend you go. It's at the 20-hour plane trip. Wednesday, I just ran around. I went to some random talks. And, midway through Wednesday, I did something really cool. I went to this company called Double Fine. I'm wearing the t-shirt. They gave it to me when I went there. At one point, I got to touch Tim Schafer. I have unfortunately washed after that. And if anyone is wondering, no, they do not have piles of money lying around the office. I did look. It's not there. But they were really awesome. They gave me tons of free stuff.
You went to the wrong offices, that's why.
I only have one. It's the
that you know of.
That the tax revenue knows of.
So yes, it's deceivingly large in those videos because it's actually really small. It's actually about the same size as Luma Studios for anyone who knows how big that is. So they're small. They're not even 50 people, and they made AAA games like Psychomorphs and Brutal Legend in there. After that, I ran back to a talk by Double Fine, in which I got to hear about the Amnesia Fortnite and how that saved their company, which was really interesting because they went from making a massive AAA game to not getting funding for its sequel, and then they broke up into making lots of small little games. So they went from a game of $25 million budget to games that were $1 million in budget, and that's how they kept their company afloat. And it's really interesting to see that they're versatile, they adapt, and if you're hearing about Kickstarter craze, they're the people who basically started it. $3.3 million that we gave them. I give them money as well. After that, I went back and I hang around, and I went to the IGF and GDC awards, which I'll get back to now because there's both interesting stories there. So then I went and ran around the exhibition. I saw people playing Blade Slinger, which was cool. It's fun to see people playing a game that you worked on. And I went to other interesting talks. I also met some guys from Valve. And it was really interesting, speaking to them and seeing, if you had to work at Valve, what did they expect of you? And it ties into what Jonathan said, is that, you can be a really awesome artist. But if you're a more rounded person, you're going to fit better into the team because they're a more versatile and adaptive company. And the programmer who was giving this talk that was at was like, well, I spend most of my time programming, but sometimes if there isn't programming, I'll go and make a crate or something. So it's pretty much like you can be ultra specialized, but there are definitely places for generalists in the industry. The other thing is I bumped into someone from S2 Games, and that's Savage Heroes of New York. And I was speaking to them, and they're like pretty interested. And I was like, well, I'm a designer and a programmer. And they really couldn't decide, what I'll do at the company. So like, here's an HR person's card. I'm like, I am never going to use this email ever. Okay, thank you very much.
That's on the internet now.
It's okay. I'm a Dota fan. So yeah, then I ran into some other really interesting people. I didn't know they were really, people. He was a really old grey man. I didn't know what his name was before, but he gave this really moving poem about his perfect game. And afterwards I went and spoke to him. Turns out I was speaking to Ernest Adams, the founder of the IGDA, who's, one of the most influential people in game development and has been there for ages and ages. So, it was just really great that, there were these great people that I could go and speak to. Now, to get back to Wednesday night, because Wednesday was awesome. There was this particular moment of, the IGF Awards, and you get people coming up and making speeches. And the one speech that I loved, and one speech which had really great meaning for me, actually changed the way I viewed how I wanted to make games from then onwards. The first speech was by Alexandra Bruce, who made Antichamber and won the Technical Excellence Award at the IGF. And he was like saying that you have to chase after your dreams. and you really have to pursue it. And you take the odd chance that there's that guy from Epic, and they make Unreal, and I make Unreal mods. So I really have to try and speak to them and see what happens. And because of that, you can go down this journey that would never happen. So let's just say there's Shigeru Miyamoto there. Take the chance and go and speak to him and see what could happen. And then there was the thing that sort of really changed how my outlook on making video games. And that was Warren Spector, who won the Lifetime Achievement Award at GDC this year. And the essence of his talk, he gave a really long speech. But it was really worth it. And the essence was, the most precious resource you have is your time. And with that time of yours, you can only make so many video games. So, don't compromise the quality of what you do. Pursue the level of excellence you want to make, because there are only so many games you can ever make. And you will have more ideas than you can make in your lifetime. And you have to work with teams. And everyone has so many ideas that you can never make all of those ideas. It's impossible completely. But you have to have faith in your team, and you have to share a goal of creating something that is truly excellent. And that sort of changed me. It's like, well, I really have to strive every time I make a game to make it the utter best game it can be. Because otherwise, what am I doing with my time? And that's my most valuable resource. Because one day I'm going to be dead, and I can't make any more video games, and that's kind of sad. Okay. And after that, I went to an indie game party called the Wild Rumpus Party. And I met, all the award winners. I met Phil Fish, who just won the IGF Seamus McNally Prize for Fez. And, I got to play JS Joust in T-mode, which was one of the most amazing things ever. For those of you who don't know what JS Joust is, just go watch a video of it. It's that good. I also got to meet James Portnow. He's the guy who writes extra credits. And I got to speak to him, and he was like, no, you should totally email me. And I was like, what? So I got to meet people who was like, are legends to me. It's like, I've played their stuff, I've watched their stuff, and it's like, you just sit there and you can have like a normal conversation with them. So it's really this amazing experience, and it's worth 30, 40,000 rand if you can afford it. I'm really broke right now. So I thank you all, and I hope you've taken something from this.
I have one question. So at the GDC, are indie games very prominent?
Yeah.
A lot of indie games that I'm sure a lot of people here are watching.
I found that it was pretty split, where it was like the indie state tends to stay around themselves, and the AAAs do that too. So if you're hanging around AAA the whole time, you actually don't hear much of the indies. And if you're hanging around the indies, you barely see the AAA. So it's kind of what you want to do.
Okay. Any other questions?
There was another nugget of information that I wanted to say that I didn't say just now. So part of the writing workshop was also giving your viewers, your players, what they expect, but not how they expect it. And that was something that was echoed in the Diablo presentation, where it was like, we know that we're going to be creating a barbarian, for example, and it's like everyone already expects what a barbarian is going to look like. They expect someone who's huge and macho, and who's a melee warrior, and who slams the ground and does all. How can we put a twist on him? We'll make him an old man. And so he's got this long, white hair, and he's basically this grandfather guy. And they did that with all of their characters. And the idea is that people as players of games and as viewers of all media, we're exposed to formulas the whole time. And we know what these formulas are, even if we haven't studied it or anything. We know what they look like. When we watch a movie and it doesn't follow the set formula, we notice, and we usually, I'm talking as in general, people are criticized for not following the formulas, but if they follow it too rigidly, then it's boring. So the same with games. It's you want to give people something that they expect, but not how they expect.
Okay, so I'm going to show off what I'm currently working on. The game is currently called False Eden. I haven't had time to think of a decent name, so it's sort of a half, whatever you want to call it, attempt at putting a name together. But hopefully I can give you guys a better idea of what I'll show you here. That's great. Hopefully I can give you a better idea of what I'm going for. And afterwards I'd like feedback and ideas and thoughts that would hopefully help me with this. It's the wrong presentation. No, it's the right presentation. Okay. I hope everything's in here. I see the formatting and stuff I did gone, but it's fine. So,
open the temporary one.
Okay, just I can't see the blue, so then it's fine. Okay, so the origin of this idea came from what happened with myself and my friends at university. We kind of, as a group, go through phases of playing games. The most recent 3 phases, we've been playing Pokemon on Game Boy again. Games like Battle for Westmark, which we have available on the lab computers where we do our computer science labs, and various MMOs. So it's not just a single MMO because we all have different ideas of what a good MMO is. We all play different MMOs. But the ideas come from the main big ones, more or less. This game kind of starts as I needed to do a Dreambook play entry. Well, I didn't need to do one, but I thought it would be a good idea to enter. I've been planning on entering for quite a few years now, and I've never actually finished anything, so this year will hopefully be the year. So Dreambook Play offers an Xbox 360 and a Windows Phone 7 category, and I haven't decided which category I'm entering yet. So it's a toss-up between the two, and I'm trying to do the game where the gameplay and the game design is not stuck to a single platform. So the idea should hopefully translate well between 2 different control systems. So just to start off with, where some of the ideas come from. So I'm building an RPG, which kind of draws from Pokemon in a sense where there's a clear turn-based strategy definition. You wouldn't call Pokemon a turn-based game, but every instance of combat that you do relies on several things. It's easy to learn, so anyone picking up the game can say, I know how to fight with one Pokemon versus another. You don't have a complex system, which means you don't have the pitfalls that come with it. If you played Battle for Westmark, for instance, your first game ever, you're probably going to spend a lot of time trying to figure out what the hell's going on. And Pokemon doesn't have this, so a lot of influence comes from where you need to be concentrating on not making the gameplay too difficult. So Pokemon did this well, so I kind of strive to build the same sort of easy-to-use system Pokemon uses. And the one thing that Pokemon did that I disagreed with was out-of-world combat. This basically was where if you're fighting another trainer or a Pokemon in the wild, it would go to a separate screen where you have a bunch of menus. Final Fantasy does this. There are lots of big AAA titles that do this, and I disagree with it. I made a note to encourage this one-button play. I'm sure everyone that's playing Pokemon knows you have that one strong Pokemon that you just have to press A for that whole battle until the battle's end. And I kind of don't want to encourage that. So just to look at what Pokemon look like, if you didn't know, on the left-hand side, that's kind of what your world looks like when you're playing Pokemon. And on the right-hand side, if you're in a battle or looking at the different things your Pokemon can do, that's what you look at. So it's very disjointed when you move from the world to the view on the right. The next game that I mentioned was Battle for Westmark. It's a turn-based strategy. There's lots of intricate design decisions that they put into the game. It's an open source game if you want to go look at the source. Open source also means it's free, so go play it.
I think I might have it installed on my laptop, I'm not sure.
Kevin says he might have it installed if you wanted today. The main things that come out of it that are really useful is the fact that it takes place on the hex grid. There are numerous things that you can take out of the hex grid style gameplay when you move on the hex grid. The one that I chose the hex grid for mainly was equal distances, and I liked the idea that the combat has clear evolutions. If I have a magical attack and I'm attacking some guy that's only a warrior with a sword, he can't hit me back because I'm hitting him from a distance. There's definite clear advantages between being one class over another, and I want to try and capture that with False Eden. The other thing is there's clear advantages and disadvantages with each strategy. This goes without saying. Pokemon did the same thing where if you were a fire Pokemon, you did half damage to water Pokemon, same thing. The other thing is there's terrain-based bonuses in Battle for Westmark. So if I'm in trees, I have 60% defense rating, whereas if I'm on normal open plains and someone shoots me with an arrow, obviously I'm going to have less defense because there's nothing for me to hide behind that kind of thing. And another thing that Battle for Westmark did was it takes into account range. I mentioned it earlier where if I'm a magic user, I can't be hit by a melee user if I attack him from a distance. The only thing that I disagreed with what Battle for Westmark did was I can only use a magic attack on something I'm standing next to. So I had to walk up to somebody, be standing next to this big ass troll with the club that can hit me and kill me in one hit, and hit him with my magic. He can't hit me when I'm hitting him with magic. But then it's his turn and he goes, oh look, you're dead. And that to me kind of doesn't emphasize the fact that you could be one hero in the game. And because there's so many different things to take into account, Battle for Westmark had a steep learning curve, and this is something that I think I need to try and get around. So just for those who don't know what it looks like, a closer look at the combat is on the top left. There's a whole bunch of things that were considered by whoever played whichever character in there, like where to place their characters. They have other concepts like, unless you have, I can't remember what the skill's called, there's a certain skill that if you don't have it, you can't walk past a character in the one block.
Skirmisher.
Sorry?
Skirmisher.
Skirmishing. So if you don't have skirmishing, you can't walk between the gap between one player and another player if it's one block. So with these three characters here, they've effectively blocked the purple character from moving past them. It has to go around a longer route.
Or escaping.
Yeah. So you can kind of trap people in things, that kind of thing. And that I think leads to all sorts of really cool gameplay mechanics. And then lastly, MMOs. Typically with your big MMOs, you have to focus on building the correct build. There's lots of different cookie cutter builds for doing all sorts of different things, but the emphasis is that not one build is better than all the rest. And there are multiple ways you can play any character that aren't wrong, but that give you a complete different play session, play style, that kind of thing. So that was one thing that MMOs offer that is kind of cuts and paste that would make a good idea. And then the focus on content. A lot of games that people make as indies these days don't have large storylines because people don't have the time. But I thought it would be a good idea to try focus on building a good storyline and building large amounts of things to do, items to collect, builds to make, that kind of thing. So through this, hopefully there'll be replayability. So just to look at different stat systems, I did mention Ragnarok Online, which is the top left. There's World of Warcraft on your top right, and at the bottom there's Guild Wars. And if you've never played one of those games and you look at the game that you haven't played, it probably makes no sense to you. I think a big issue with role-playing games these days is transparency. The interface from a gamer that hasn't played any of these games before to your game should be simple. So that's something I'd like to try to do. So what is False Eden? It's a turn-based role-playing game. It's on a hex grid, and you're trying to take control of a new world called Eden. I decided not to give you the full backstory because it's about 3 pages that I wrote. Figured you guys wouldn't appreciate listening to me talk for 3 pages worth of story. So I summarized it. Basically, the Earth is destroyed in the future. You land on a new planet called Eden, crash land rather, and there's magic. So I kind of from the start decided I wanted to have magic in this game. But otherwise, pretty much everything follows the same rules that you would want to have in real life. The controls in the end had to be cut down to simple ideas where I didn't make anything that was simply platform specific. So the basic ideas are in place. So I want to have a thumbstick or scroll. So if I'm on a touch device, I can scroll, move my thumb up and down for moving between menus, that kind of thing. And hopefully through this, where it's simple controls for everything, it can be intuitive. The movements, so the player control for the turn-based system will be quite simple. There'll be basically 4 steps: the player move, the player action, AI move, AI action. And obviously for performance considerations, AI will only be run close to the player. But simply this means I can move as a player and have no penalty if I touch on the screen in the wrong location and move to the wrong place. I can correct it and move to the right place and then go to my player action turn. I kind of thought it would be a good idea to have some leniency when there's controller problems. I'm very horrible with touch games where I always go for the wrong places, that kind of thing. It gets frustrating for me. So especially in a turn-based game, I think this could be quite an issue. So action-wise, it's broken down into 4 main actions where you can use a magic spell, use an item, you can attack or you can talk to something. But this is all dependent on the situation you're in. So just how the combat will work is it's all going to, obviously because it's taking place in the world, you could have probably up to 6 people around you, which could be quite scary. But I've broken it down into 3 main attack types, so melee attacks, ranged attacks, and magic attacks. And each will have their bonuses and their cons. The idea is that if I choose to be a melee warrior, there will be a distinct disadvantage over a magic user who can attack me from 5 blocks away, for instance. And then each system, kind of, when I broke them down when designing, I figured out that they kind of have to have their own pros and cons, apart from one being stronger than the other. And for example, the ranged, there's a chance for me to, when I shoot an arrow at someone, to miss the person I'm aiming at. But if I miss the person I'm aiming at, obviously I could hit someone behind them, or if I happen to hit someone in front of them, it's not going to hit them. So it was very different to if I use magic on an area, where if I'm targeting an area and I miss the area, to if I shoot an arrow in a straight line, obviously it can hit something on the way. So the idea is you can actually swap freely between attacks when you're doing normal combat, that kind of thing. Which also allows you to choose a strategy depending on what you're doing. So if I'm attacking some bowmaster, obviously he's very proficient in range things. He'll be weaker against melee attacks, so I'll use melee attacks. And then, like Battle for West-North, I want the terrain to affect attack. So if there's a big tree and you're standing behind this big tree, I can't really hit you with an arrow or sword, because it makes sense to me. I don't know if that's something people would expect. So just as a visual example, so if I was the person on grey and I was attacking the person on the red block, the red block is attackable by all ranged, all magic, and long melee. But if I have a short sword, obviously I can't reach that far, so I can't attack. The same thing being, if everything around the person in grey except for 2-0 was blocked, neither one of the 2 players could attack each other. So the terrain, I think, should make a big difference to how you actually decide on how to go about your combat. So the next thing is, because it's an RPG, I think the way you should explain how things progress is there's a character progression system. And I don't feel that the way many MMOs and RPGs do it, where you choose a class and you stick to that class, works. The idea is for False Eden is you choose a proficiency. So I can choose a melee proficiency, which makes me better with swords and that kind of thing, but possibly weaker to something else. And the focus is on a stat system where I can choose the stats that work best with my skills. So just stats-wise, there's 5 main stats that I've kind of worked out. And they kind of have intuitive advantages and disadvantages. So the first 3 being strength, intelligence, and dexterity. Obviously, strength will allow me to use better armor. Better armor means I can take more hits. Intelligence, on the other hand, would give me a better mana pool and better mana regeneration. So if I need to use more skills, I would rather take intelligence over strength. So each stat has their bonuses and their cons. And then the last 2 are agility and vitality. And for starters, the stats are very linearly additive to the bonuses they give. But at some point, once everything's in place, I would like to make them adjust things across each stat. So if I have an increase in vitality, it might increase the armor rating that I can carry, for instance. So,
Back.
okay, yeah, sorry, thank you. So each level that the character goes up, you'll get stat points to allocate. And there'll be maxes to each stat, and the stat allocation will be on an exponential curve. So if I max 1 stat, I'll have used more stat points than if I go 75% with 2 stats, etc. And then leveling wise, I figured I should use a 30 level system because it means less balancing number wise for experience on my side. And then I can also aim for a sort of 75% of the max level I can finish the game. So I want to balance everything to the point where if you're level 20, you can finish any challenge in the game. I'm not saying it'll be easy, but that's the kind of target I'm aiming for. And basically, you get experience in every battle, and every battle you have a chance to gain items. So you can get swords, potions, that kind of thing every battle. Then there's also items-wise, it would make sense to have equipment. So the 2 main categories would be weapons and armors. And each thing would have different requirements according to what it's best suited for. So if you have a heavy longsword, it might require 28 strength for you to carry it, because you need the right amount of strength to carry this heavy sword. The same thing armor-wise, but less restrictive on the armor side. I could be an archer that uses heavy armor. It just means that I can move less, that kind of thing. And then the skill system, I figured the proficiencies that I mentioned earlier, like melee and defense, that kind of thing, should be built into the skill system. So you could have trees of completely non-active skills. So better accuracy with the bow, or proficiency with axe, so you have better damage with axe items, that kind of thing. So you can invest your skill points, instead of in skills, put it into things that give buffs to your character, but without actually needing you to cast them. And through the proficiencies, obviously, it would give class-like growths. So if you have an assassin skill, obviously it would be a skill tree. It may not be active skills like assassinate a person or backstab, that kind of thing, but it could give you bonus damage if you sneak up on someone, that kind of thing. So yeah, there aren't a lot of skills that have been thought out for the system, because I think the base combat should be in before I start thinking of things that change how the base combat would work for a player. But yeah, so the major goals will be a diverse combat system, strategic combat where you can choose between different methods of doing any given battle to hopefully make it more interesting, and an in-world experience that the player can explore through. And the biggest stumbling blocks that I can think of at the moment is it's a time-consuming project, especially because I want to be ready for Dreamworld Play. The deadline for Dreamworld Play is June 12th for those that want to enter. But for those that's doing exam time starts sort of May 28th. So it's kind of shortened for us. And I think I'm going to use quite a lot of art. So my programmer art skills aren't going to cut it eventually. But hopefully I have something that I can lure people in with by then. And I think the content will probably be what takes most of the time. So the current state of the project, there's a player character in the world already wraps. So when I built the hex grid, I decided I should build it so that you can go from one side of the world and walk completely around to the other side. The base movement, therefore, is also NPC positioning and drawing already. So some of the base systems are in place. So just a quick demo of where I am. Go here. So I decided I should make something slightly better than the hex grid. Yeah, slightly better than what the hex grid looked like before. So I actually took out my tablet that I got a while back and decided to do some drawings there. As you can tell, I'm very talented. But the player's in, you can move around, and the next step for me is to actually start building in gameplay mechanics, so combat, NPC talking, that kind of thing. It's actually very simple at the stage that it is right now, but I'm hoping to have stuff playable completely by the next meeting. Not necessarily within content, but yeah. So next meeting, I hopefully want to show you guys that I've got all the combat done. Equipment systems, the NPC dialogue system, which I did design, but I thought it would take too long to explain, and let's placeholder graphics, so hopefully it will look more like what I wanted to find it look like next time. And then if you guys have questions or suggestions.
So one important thing I hope I didn't miss, you mentioned it earlier on, but in terms of the objectives of your combat. This is like, for instance, where you have an RPG where you encounter individual battles and you get that done, whereas like with that, what's that second game you're using as an example?
Battle Force.
Yeah, with that where you had like a whole army set up. Look, I'm not familiar with these kind of games, but for instance, it made me think of something like Advance Wars on the Game Boy Advance, where your purpose was to capture an entire territory.
Yeah.
It wasn't, whereas yours, I'm getting the impression it's like a traditional RPG where you are exploring a world.
Yeah.
You're not just clearing stage by stage. So how does what is your objective in your combat?
Okay.
Just to win individual combat or to capture areas? Or?
Well, I've tried to shorten the story to not go into too much detail, but basically as part of the crash landing on this planet, you need to sort of make yourself at home. And there are 3 or 4 races that I've designed and planned that will hopefully at least have one of them in by next meeting, where there's conflicting factions within the game world. So in the sea there were beings that that the planet scans when we decided this was a good planet to land on didn't see. And when we landed, they decided, well, they don't actually want us on their planet, and they kind of come and try and kick you off the planet. And
sorry to interrupt this, guys. Guys at the bar want to know what time you'd like them to stay open until. They would like to call last rounds, and I just thought one more drink. Sorry for interrupting.
One more drink and then
everyone, if you want another drink, quickly go.
Yeah. Sorry, please quickly grab, come back there after I'm saying. Don't worry.
Sorry, can I ask you some more questions?
So yeah, like the story-wise, I've kind of gotten a whole world story.
Ernest, I'm so sorry for interrupting.
That's fine. That's fine. We're in Q&A now.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
They're just making us careful this time.
So there is this whole story to build this sort of feeling of that you're in the world. The reason I didn't actually want to touch on it is because the dialogue system I want you to be able to, as a player, do several things that maybe make you seem like a bad person. So maybe then the humans that you landed with aren't interested in dealing with you anymore. They kind of pick you up.
You must kill X amount of units in this area to achieve
there will be objectives like that, but like because of the Battle Force not being friends, they won't be very general. So it won't be go destroy boss X. It'll be race X is attacking your village and you want to defend it.
Oh, okay.
So it'll be broader, but the base idea will yeah, there will be certain antagonists that get triggers, and if you can't that using the focus is mostly on the expansive world where there are several factions because difficulty between being better and not. Well, it's not necessary. It's not direct. Like if I'm a complete ranged user, and I've maxed out my stats to give me the best range damage, and I attack a melee guy with resistance, perhaps he has heavy armor, he can't catch up with me, so I can random hit him and do anything else. But if he's got light armor and heavy damage, he can catch up with one hit. It's not just something
to get off.
I will still be here for quite a while afterwards, but I think time-wise we should quickly do the tower defense.
Yeah. Do you want to ensure your...
So, Alec kind of last week said, guys, make a tower defense. And I figured it's a good idea. So,
like 2 hours or something.
yeah, it was quick, but it helped that I knew the tools that I was using. And it's going to lag on Kevin's laptop, I'm sorry. But I basically took the GM Studio beta and I thought I've never made an HTML5 game and I know how to use GameMaker. So let's see how quickly I can make a tower defense style game in GameMaker. So, yeah. This is the tower defense I made in a few hours. It's not polished, it doesn't work properly, and it doesn't have any really fun elements.
Sounds good, sure.
But I hope it gives you the right idea. So basically I've got shooting towers, so the S is a shooting tower, and the enemies come from right to left.
That's awesome.
And we're defending the left from the right. I couldn't think of any better way to describe it. And you basically, at the moment, get random towers to do. But the different idea that I had for this tower defense was you have towers that can manipulate the enemy's path. So the enemies always go right to left. But for instance, this tower that I'm placing now will try and make them rotate around it in a counterclockwise direction. And the idea with that was that I try and make it so that you can have multiple ways to play this game, where you don't focus on the actual upgrading of towers and the difficulty of enemies, but you try to keep the enemies in your defensive area as long as possible by changing how they move. So that's kind of the tower defense that I did, if you ask. Most of the time was actually spent trying to get the mouse to work. I forgot the very simple thing that if I don't click on an object in Game Maker, I'm actually looking for a global mouse event, not a mouse event. So a lot of the time, I'm sorry to say, was spent on actually figuring out how to get my mouse to work. There is also sound, but I'm not going to try and get that working right now. So yeah, that was my tower defense.
Cool guys, before we get into the rest of the tower defense, I thought we'd select our theme for the next monthly challenge. So
The answer is A.
Yes!
Challenge accepted.
Next month's theme is dubstep.
Why would we randomly generate 100 numbers and take the average?
I think we're good.
So, does anyone, I think that we should just keep that.
I'll enter.
Who's going to enter?
Okay, we've got at least one, we're good.
Or should I run it? Should I run it again?
It's good, it's good.
Cool. Dubstep it is. Just ruin my day.
You can have like,
I know this was my idea, so this whole tower defense challenge was my idea, but I had kind of a family crisis, so I didn't actually get to spend much time on it. I spent about 2 hours. 2.5 hours on it.
I see a common trend.
Tower defense, but there's basically what happens at the moment is I went to try and make a first-person shooter tower defense hybrid sim at the same time in 2 hours, which is quite ambitious. But I'm pretty stoked with what I did. What we have is monsters that move along a path, so a waypoint path, so a set path, and you can place 3 different towers that don't do anything at the moment. And there's the base that you're trying to defend, which basically displays its health. So it's got a little bit down, but not nearly what this challenge required. So basically, you've got your little world, you've got your base that you're defending with its health. You've got places to place buildings, so we can go into here and it says, well, what do you want to place? It's very dark. What do you want to place? So I said, okay, well, I'll place the fire tower. Walk back. And you've got
I see enemies.
Little fire tower there.
So do I.
We place a rock tower. And we can place an ice tower. And they're all basically triggers in Unity, because the plan is to have it that you can walk into one and upgrade it and mix and match the different elements. You can see my little monsters running along their set path. If I just move this out of the way. Scroll out, you can see them.
Yes, I can.
I don't have my standard mouse with me, so I'm struggling to scroll. Okay. So, believe me, they are moving around.
Alec,
I can show it to
click
you.
on a monster and then click on the window and push F.
There we go.
Okay, we'll follow the monsters.
We've renamed
The
him.
latest spawn monster. Okay. You get my point. Cool. And obviously they're not just going to carry on spawning, they're going to spawn waves and stuff like that. There you go. My apologies for letting the team down. And then there was
exponentially increasing rate, and just keep it at wave 1.
one submission from the guys in Cape Town. I submitted it to me at 5 to 6 when I was about to leave, so I can read his email. I can give him the credit. His name is Ruan. Hopefully, I haven't played it yet, so I have no idea what's what. Hopefully, there's some instructions and his name is in the game. So let's check it out. Left click, select the tank, left click to give move command, move to the right to complete this tutorial. Cool. Nice. More slowed. Left clicking the plan, drag across.
So you can make a movie route, a wavy route, by like dragging. So if you click on the tank and drag, that's cool.
Cool. Slow time by pressing space.
I think he just like.
Choose the circle.
I think you're supposed to kill the circle.
Kill the circle.
Okay. It says many tactical uses apparently.
Well, you have to press space to slow down.
Watch the next tutorial piece. Kill the circle.
Keep moving.
I think slow time has many practical uses.
Especially when you're using a touchpad.
Yes, slow time.
Yeah, but it slows the bullets as well. That's the problem. It's exactly the same.
Well, it would be a bit bad if
Push escape to access the menu. Try the adventure level.
Start adventure level.
Art adventure level.
Art adventure level.
Okay. But I don't see how this is targeted.
You're the creeps. What? I wonder how long you can go around in circles around that tower.
Oh! No, it's one player. You've got to control the creeps.
And there's moving towers. Nice.
Okay, yeah, let's just go.
Or it's the finish.
Let's see how long it survives.
Well, you can see its health at the bottom.
It's dying.
Yeah.
Let's watch it die. What happens if you go slow motion now?
I have slow motion unlocked. Oh dear. I am going to die.
Now you're going
It's actually works pretty well.
You should have just gone as far as possible from the towers.
Yeah, whatever.
This is more interesting.
Who is this?
It's a guy called Ruan from Cape Town.
I think, and you can't go through the towers.
So that one died.
And the one changed to a 0.
Yeah. So he died. Let's try different strategies.
I think we can safely say this is the best tower defense.
Yeah.
Because they're actually towers defending something.
Well.
Yeah.
I think this game should be a doodle.
I think you like
Doodle tank.
It's like trying to try.
Run away.
I can predict the future.
Write your name.
Look at the hell.
So that was pretty cool. Does anyone want to discuss what they did and did not do?
I just have a game I was going to show. So Diogo Jonkers has been working on an awesome game, and he asked me to do the art. So I have like the game with some character art in there, but I'm still working on the environments. But you can play it. It's just on a phone though, so
You can show it on the camera if you go close very carefully.
I don't even want to show the whole world yet.
Okay, then we won't. Cool. Does anyone else have anything to show? Thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed the meeting.
Yeah.
I've just got like a random, sorry to like now I'm chucking a spanner in the works. Little game dev type thingy on the weekend, game jam.
Yeah.
Not to like, as a possible future idea.
Yeah.
What would happen if we maybe did like a game jam over like more than one weekend? So you did like one weekend more like the design and the concepts and stuff, and then the next weekend and in between maybe work on it, and then because that way you could maybe make a better game.
Well,
And then I don't know, but it's hard. But it's
what I've personally found with running with the competitions and stuff is people, even though they say they'd rather have a month competition, they don't really have the time. It's a lot easier to get people to commit to 2 days of their month to sit down and write games. So the game jam has like 2 days works better.
Yeah.
But I'm sure if enough people are keen, we can try to do another month-long thing.
And that's kind of the point of these theme-based monthly challenges. You can form teams, do it in your own sort of time. If you guys want to form teams to work on these things every weekend, then you can do that. That's a lot. So next month, dubstep.
Are you going to keep the other ideas for rolling next time?
I think it was really